folks, the Simplicity repair and startup is going to be waiting until springtime. That way it's a little bit closer to when the ground is thawed and we can try the tiller out. So in the meantime, I figured we do a repair and startup on this 1960 Gravely Model LS walk-behind tractor. I picked this up last weekend and it's in pretty fair shape aside from all the surface rust and all that. But I wanted to do a really quick revamp on it to see whether it's going to run and see what kind of condition is in it. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this one or if I'm going to end up selling it, because I already have a 59 LS, which you can find in videos back in 2012 that I picked up. And I still have it. It's my brush hogging tractor that I use on a yearly basis, and I don't know if I'm going to hang on to this one yet. So we're just going to give it a real quick going through, fuel system, ignition system, make sure all the oil and everything's okay on it, and see if it'll fire up, and we'll take it from there. So anyways, let's get this carburetor off of here and take a look inside. Well, this is never a good sign. So the throttle butterfly is missing a little brass screw, as you can see, and I shook the air cleaner tube around some and I don't hear anything rattling around. So more than likely this engine ended up eating that screw, and with any luck it ended up passing it out of the exhaust, because I've had Briggs & Strattons where I've pulled them apart and the top of the cylinder's got screw prints all over it, along with the top of the piston too. But since this is a little screw, I'm sure it passed it right through, but I guess we'll find out when we go to fire it up. Well, she done been sitting. It's definitely going to need to go through the glass bead blaster, as you can see. I guess it's not all too bad in the grand scheme of things, but the glass bead blaster will clean that right back to new, pull all the jets out of it and blow all the orifices out and everything like that, and then this will be ready to go back together. Everything cleaned up fairly well inside the glass bead blaster. There is some heavy grease that's still left on there that didn't blow off, but I'm not too worried about it because the insides of them was my main concern. And it blew out all that dry, crusty gas, so everything's nice and clean and ready to go back together. I also repacked the main jet needle, so that has new leather packing in it, along with a new O-ring gasket. Everything else was nice and clean for jets. I do have a new flange gasket, and I am going to be putting a used body gasket into this too. I usually save these when they come out of carburetors that I rebuild, because it's an expensive body gasket, so I figured I'd end up just using a used one in here instead of putting a brand new one in, because I don't know what I'm doing with the tractor yet. So now we can reassemble everything and get the carburetor all squared away. So now that my carburetor's been all rebuilt, I have to get the fuel bowl, or the fuel shutoff, rather, squared away on the bottom of the gas tank. And I believe that I have these in stock still. If I'm not mistaken, I haven't used my last one yet. But it's about a $14 or $15 part, and there's no sense in putting that on here on a tractor that I don't know if it's going to run well yet, and I don't know what I'm going to be doing with this thing. So in that case, I usually end up rebuilding these. I'll run them through the glass bead blaster, clean out the bowl. Most of the time I can reseal that shutoff with a new leather gasket and get everything to work well again. So we'll end up doing that, and I also have some fuel line that I saved from repairs, and this is all fuel line that isn't cracked. It's still usable and flexible, but I use it on projects like this rather than putting brand new fuel line on it. I don't exactly recommend doing that, being a glass bowl, because they can shatter while it's in your hand. And I have had that happen before, but luckily enough the glass has never shot into my hand before. So there's the inside of the bowl. There you go, you guys should be able to see that now. So it's just the same as the carburetor for the most part, dry powdery gas. I'll pull a little screen out from the top half here, get that all scrubbed up, and then I can get the glass bowl cleaned up, and that should all be fine. The shutoff on the back side, as you can see, there's a little nut or collar below that T-handle. If you pull that out, you can back everything right out of it, and most of the time I can punch a leather gasket for it, slide it over the T-handle, the little nub on the end, and then it will reseal when that packing nut goes back inside the body. Glass bowl cleaned up nice in the glass bead blaster, so everything's ready to reassemble. I did make a new packing out of some leather that I had, and that's for the T-handle shutoff. You can also make it out of rubber cork, which is this stuff right here. A little bit more flexible than just straight cork. Doesn't work as well as leather, though. If you do have that, I would recommend that for making the packing, because I'll stamp out stuff for the Zenith carburetors, which I keep on hand, as you can see right there, for the main jets, because I do quite a few of those. And it works out fairly well for packing. You just oil it down and let it soak for a minute or two before you put it back in there, and everything slides in real nice, and it seems to seal fairly well. So I got the screen all scrubbed down. That's nice and clean and clear. I have a new bowl gasket to go on there, and we'll be ready to put everything back on and screw it back onto the tank. And next in line is going to be getting this Magneto taken off and checking the points. So for those of you who have to clean the points on these Magnetos, I know some guys try to do it where you leave the Magneto on and you take this cover off, which I've done that before, and this bottom screw down here isn't exactly the easiest one to get to. So what I usually do when I take these Magnetos off is I spin the engine over until the timing mark is going to be on the top. You see that little notch right there, the little mark? So that is going to be your timing mark for when the piston comes at the top dead center, and it corresponds to marks on this face of the Magneto. But anyways, the easiest way to get these Magnetos off and on in the same orientation, because if you put it on the wrong way, it's only 180 degrees off, is I just leave that mark somewhere up top, and then I'll pull the Magneto off, do what I have to do with it, and then I just spin this around until the mark is facing up top again, and then bolt it back on. And believe me folks, it's a heck of a lot easier than trying to get this here cover off while it's mounted in the machine. As you can see, trying to access the points, because they're all the way down the bottom of the Magneto, it's not exactly the easiest thing to do. Just a side note, when pulling the Magnetos off too, if you use a stubby wrench like so, it's a lot easier to get in here, and you get plenty of swing room behind the tire and clearance to get the two bolts off underneath, versus using a full-size wrench and then you end up having to take the tire off or the hub off. And then of course if you have gear reduction wheels on it, that's a whole nother can of worms. Yeah, that's not too overly bad in there, folks. So the bottom point contact has got a little bit of corrosion on it, but the top one's actually pretty fair. The faces of them have that white corrosion on them, but sometimes you can see me scraping it off. Sometimes you get it on the sides of them too, when they sit and they get damp. So to clean these up, I just run 400 grit sandpaper in between them, like so. I know some guys say, oh, you gotta use paper, or you gotta use crocus cloth, or you gotta use something that's really smooth so you don't mar the points, but I've been using 400 grit sandpaper for I don't know how long now, and I've never had any issues with it. It's fine enough where it doesn't mar up the point faces, and you still get a nice contact, and it's still smooth, but it's also gritty enough where it takes off of any of the corrosion and whatnot, so that way you have a nice connection between the points when they touch. And there you have it, folks. Nice smooth points face. And that's why the 400 grit works out fairly well. It's tough enough to cut through all the corrosion and all the crap, but still gentle enough to leave a nice surface for good connection. I pulled the plug out of this, and as you guys can see, providing that it focuses properly, it's a little bit crustaceous inside of that there cylinder. Top of the piston's got a lot of crispy rust on it that must have fallen off from the head, because it's obviously enough an aluminum piston. And then if I run it down a little bit, the cylinder wall has a light surface rust on it just from sitting. But obviously enough, the engine is free, and I'm not all too worried about that. So what I am going to do is spray a little bit of penetrating oil down inside the cylinder, just to have something in there that it can work up and down while I try to start it. And then of course once the oil pump and everything else kicks into it, we won't have to worry about that. And of course the last thing to do, folks, before we make an attempt to fire this thing up is check the oil. So I just pulled the little plug out, tilted it forward, It didn't take much tilting to get the oil to come out, so I know there's plenty of it in there, and I'm not going to bother dumping it out because that's actually pretty reasonably decent for all I'm concerned. Definitely better than some of the black gold that I've dumped out of some other stuff that I've had here. That's pretty nasty. So that's good. And I know the air cleaner is pretty darn good too. As you can see, that's fairly new oil. So obviously enough, luckily, this guy seemed to have took care of his machines and seemed to have kept them serviced at least, which is nice. So the starter on this too, I don't have a 6-volt battery for it. A customer currently has it in his TO35 that I worked on. I loaned him the battery so he can get it back home, and I've yet to go and pick that up. So we're just going to be strap starting this thing for now. The starter does move, and the starter clutch does engage somewhat as it should. It's a little bit sticky and it's a little bit gritty, so that might have to come apart at some point depending on what happens to this tractor and get cleaned out. But it'll be enough where we can get the strap around it and pull this thing over. Oh, and we also have to get an exhaust on here too of some sort. So I know I got some good used mufflers. We'll thread one of those suckers onto there, and then I think we'll be all set to go. Just when you think everything's all set, we're gonna have to change the gas tank out, folks. As you can see, it's leaking. I think the plate peeled off and the solder came undone at some point, so I'll go get another tank and swap that out and try this again. Wow. Ah, figures. Well, that's idling along pretty well, folks. Unfortunately, the exhaust valve wasn't seating very well, which made it a little bit hard to start, but once it's ran for a bit and warms up, with any luck, it'll burn off some of the crap from the face and it'll seal a little bit better than what it was and have a little bit more power. So I'm pretty happy with it. Definitely glad that I picked up the lot. It came with another parts tractor that, oddly enough, was only 3 digits off on the serial number from this one, so who knows how close they were on the line when they were getting produced in the factory, but thought it was pretty cool. So anyways, folks, there you have it. That's the 1960 Gravely Model LS.